All right, so we're going to talk about urbanization right now and continue our discussion from last week. And so looking at the previous notes, you discussed and reviewed what life was like in pre-industrial cities versus industrial cities, also looking at what life was like in MDCs as they developed industrialization compared to life now, and how LDCs are kind of following that same path. So we're going to take a look at how geographers look at growth in cities based on a theory called the central place theory. So that's what we're going to dive into today for the most part. And you guys are going to have some practice with that. So Walter Kristall was a geographer who looked at the use of land in cities and tried to predict how geographers could look at its use to help with trying to predict how cities could grow. So there are a couple of things that he assumes, which is very similar to von Thunen with agriculture and with Weber with the least cost theory. So a couple of things, just like with von Thunen, he assumed that land was flat, just as von Thunen assumed that all land was arable, that population was distributed evenly, just as Weber assumed that all of the factories had equal access to workers. Pretty much von Thunen that transportation methods were equal and accessible, and but a little bit different is the fact that all cities kind of go through an evolutionary process as far as growth goes. So some main ideas with Kristaller's theory. One is that the central place is the area for urban growth within cities, that this is most of where your services and your economy is going to be focused in the city to provide services and economic opportunities for people who live surrounding the city, so in the suburbs or rural areas. And the area around a city is called a hinterland, where it has economic influence. And you also have range and threshold. So range is how far someone's going to go for a service. If it's something that can be provided in their local community, they're not going to be willing to go very far. So maybe like food, like a deli, like fast, like for a restaurant or a gas station. But if it's for a concert or specialized medical care, they're going to be willing to go much farther. And then a threshold is the minimum amount of people that a business needs to be profitable or to survive. So again, a hospital is going to need a higher threshold than, say, a gas station to be profitable and to make it. And so a couple of things to also keep in mind is that there's competition within a city for land and things like that. And also looking at in a city, you're going to have higher thresholds for businesses and things like that and services than you would, say, in a rural area. So if you look at this diagram over here, you will see kind of how Kristaller set this up more in a hexagon pattern. So this central dot right here is where we have the central place or the biggest source of services. So the bigger the dot, the more threshold it's going to have and the larger range it's going to have. So people are going to be willing to travel a further distance to take advantage of that service. The smaller the dot, like right here, you're going to have maybe a town or a suburb of a city. People are going to have more of just their day-to-day services. They're like gas stations, grocery stores, restaurants, things like that. So they're not going to be willing to travel as far for a service there. And then with these lines here, these are going to connect the market together. So this city right here is going to impact all of these areas in the community right here. So one example of applying the central place theory is in the last 30 years or so, you've seen the growth of cities in the south and the west part of the U.S. And as people have migrated there to retire, to work in industry, you have seen the growth of urban areas providing medical care and jobs and the services that would go along with tourism, all kinds of things like that. So those central places of those cities have grown, whereas the places where they've left, those cities have contracted because the population's not there as much. And as I said, some cities have grown up in proportion, as we mentioned before. Places like Phoenix, Atlanta, and Dallas have increased their population through people retiring or looking for work, whereas you have some cities like Cleveland and Detroit have shrunk because the jobs have moved away and then people have left because there isn't work there. So those are kind of a contrast. So that's a little bit of the central place theory. You guys will practice that a little bit later on. We also have what we call the rank size rule in primate cities. So primate cities you're often going to find in developing countries. So primate cities are cities that have large population, and their population is going to be 10 times as large as the second largest city in their country. So mostly you're going to find them in developing countries. So like for example, in Argentina, Buenos Aires has 10 times the population of the second largest city in Argentina. Now a rank size rule population is more what you're going to find in a developed country. So what that is that your largest city so is going to have population, then the second largest city will be 1/2 of the population of the largest city. The third largest city would be 1/3 of the population of the largest city. So based on the ranking in that country, the population would go down as this ranking goes. So if you look at the graphs here, you can kind of see that the cities are kind of clustered depending on where they are in relation. So again, what you have got is that a lot of like Jordan, Indonesia, Iran, their cities are more spread apart. And that's again because we're dealing with more primate cities, whereas the US, you've got a lot more clustering going on, and that's because the more developed countries follow more of the rank size rule. So again, your largest city is going to be 1/n of the next largest city. So New York would be population, and then the second largest city would be 1/2, and then 1/3, and so forth. All right, world cities. So these are cities often called global cities. So they are cities located across the world that are cities of economic, political, sometimes and economic hubs internationally. And they exist throughout the world. Sometimes they're called global cities. In the US, New York and Los Angeles would be considered examples of global cities in the United States. Overseas, again, this has changed over time, but Tokyo and London would be considered other global cities. Often a global city tends to be a capital of a country, but the US is the exception because Washington, D.C. is not really an economic hub for the country. But over time, world cities have changed in their focus and shifted. Like in the 1600s, depending, Europe was the center of culture and things like that. So London, Amsterdam, and Lisbon were the hubs, but you can also the fact that these were countries that were during exploration and growing. In the 1700s, it was Rome and Paris. 1800s, it was Berlin, Chicago, New York, St. Petersburg. Now today, again, you have got world cities are also the headquarters of transnational corporations, flow of information and financial decisions, but you also have more regional cities as well. So again, in Africa, Nairobi, Johannesburg would be examples of more regional areas, but that are as influential in that area in East Asia. Besides Tokyo, you've got Beijing and things like that. So you've got world cities have more of a global influence, but then you have cities that have more of a regional influence based on a continent. Then you also have what we call a mega city. So mega cities are cities that have a population of over 10 million inhabitants. So most of your mega cities are going to be located in developing countries because of their population, but you will see them in developed countries as well. And again, often mega cities happen to also be primate cities as well. This is a chart from 2015. It's one of the most current ones I could find. But if you look at the chart here, Tokyo is the largest megacity, and that primarily is because of the fact that you've got the two or three largest cities in Japan are very densely populated because most people in Japan live in cities as opposed to the countryside. Mumbai is the second. New York comes down at 17.4 million. Los Angeles is 14.1 million people. So again, you only have two cities in the US on this list, but most of these countries, most of these cities are located in countries that are more developing than developed. So that is going to end our lecture today on the central place theory and megacities, rules, rank size rule on primate cities. Have you guys do a little bit of work with central place theory after this.